love that. Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chari Alson. I'm one of the lawyers here at Anderson Elder Law. And with the time we have today, I'm going to be going over some information that we really want to get out to folks that could use it, right? The true cost of long-term care. And we come by this topic pretty honestly in that most of the folks that come to us for maybe an initial consultation appointment or just even asking questions, this is what they want to know. How much is this going to cost us? How do we plan? Is what we did the right thing to do? Did we make a big mistake that's going to cost us money and problems in the future? And so we spend a lot of time here in our office really kind of diving right in to people's situations, figuring out on three basic areas, right? We do estate planning, care planning, and asset planning. And we put it all together in what's called life care planning, where we take a family and an older adult, carry them through a process where we make what was scary when they first joined us understandable, actionable, and get a plan in place where everybody feels pretty good about where the older adult is, on the continuum of care, the type of care they're receiving, how they're going to pay for it, and the estate planning documents are supporting all of that work. And that doesn't happen overnight, right? So when we work with clients, we work with them for a year to start, and almost every one of them renews with us at the end of that year because the work that we do in this area is so important. But we really want to also educate people in a broader way, and that's why we do these consumer education webinars. So as Ali mentioned, we invite Q&A. We can't really advise on your particular situation. If you want advice on your particular situation, that would be a great thing to call up, talk to one of our intake team about, and maybe see if you're appropriate for a consultation. But if you have sort of general questions or questions on something I said, happy to take those. So if I can get my slideshow. So usually, and we do this in an in-person format, so we have sort of these raise your hand kind of questions, but I wanted to keep them anyway because I think, especially the top line, who hopes to stay in their own home as they age? I think if I was seeing all of you in person, everybody would raise their hand, or most people would raise their hand. And even if it wasn't home, you'd say, well, I want to be in a setting that's as close to home as possible, right? So not end up in a nursing home, but maybe moving into a continuing care community or an independent living community, maybe personal care, things like that, something with a less institutional feel. And most of the people that join us on these calls have helped a loved one through a health crisis. And if you have, our hearts go out to you. We know how difficult that is. And we know from the people that call us that even if you have given some thought to, what you would want, when that reality is a present thing, the choices can oftentimes feel really overwhelming, right? So we feel very honored to help our clients sort through the choices and make the decisions that feel best for them. And we'll get into the Medicare, Medicaid thing as we move along. The thing I want to share with clients, and some of you might know this intuitively, that the cost of long-term care isn't just about the money. And what I have known, and I've been doing this 24 years as a lawyer, and I've worked in aging my entire career, is that I think people overestimate their own abilities to care for a frail older adult, older adult with moderate dementia. They think I could do it. How hard could it be? And they really don't have an awareness until they get sort of up to here of the emotional toll that can take, right? And the other thing that we see is sort of family conflict, right? It's very common for the adult children to not be in alignment about who should provide the care, right? And every single family is different, right? So one of the things I like most about my work is that there's no cookie cutter to this. Every family is different. But something I see a lot is that there is one child who sort of has the laboring oar, in this boat, and the other children might be a little more hands off, or maybe not knowing how to provide the support that is needed, and that if there wasn't good family dynamics and good communication patterns before an older adult, a parent got sick, it isn't going to get any better once you enter the stress of caregiving. So really trying to identify ahead of time, how is the family going to come together for these non-financial things, is, I think, not given a lot of examination. And I would encourage people to do that, to really get real about, who's going to help, what capacities do different siblings have. Some might not be great caregivers, but they might be awesome at finances, right? Like, to really think about how you would divide and conquer the idea of maybe moving a parent into a care setting, right? And doing that before the dementia gets to the sort of moderate to advanced stage. And then the financial uncertainty kind of comes from two things. A lot of times our family caregivers take time off from work, maybe quit a job, right? And the economic toll on them, not because they're necessarily paying for the care, but because they've had to stop earning income. Again, is, I don't think, something people realize, that the added stress that has. So I just wanted to pause and talk about, how it's more than just the nursing home bill that we're worried about, that there are these other items that, again, with a little bit of planning, you might be able to surface some better support mechanisms than you can when you're in the thick of a crisis. So a question I get a lot is sort of, what is long-term care? How do I know when my older adult family member needs it? When a diagnosis is received, that is kind of the time to start planning, right? Sometimes people like to wait. We'll take a wait and see approach. But our general guidance is like, that is the time to start thinking about what is long-term care and what is that going to look like for your family, because it isn't just one thing. If you've ever, Googled, and I guess now that's even an antiquated term, right? If you've chat GPT'd, how do I take care of my mom who is just diagnosed with dementia? You're going to get a very long answer, right? And when do you know it's time to bring in services? Well, here comes the distinction from a clinical point of view that we want clients to know about. The difference between instrumental activities of daily living, those IADLs, those are things like cooking and driving, right? You know, those are usually the two things I hear. Oh, my mom can't cook anymore. She can't drive anymore. That doesn't make you what's called nursing facility clinically eligible, right? So the types of limitations that are reviewed for whether somebody needs a nursing home level of care, or even, getting more support from a personal care home, relate to the activities of daily living. And those are defined as bathing, dressing, grooming, continence care, being able to transfer from like the bed to standing, from the chair to standing independently, or with, being able to use your own cane to do those things. And when you have deficiencies in two or more of those areas, then you're what's considered nursing facility clinically eligible. And it's really important to understand that, because what you want to know is, where do you fit on this continuum of care? This is my favorite slide that we do in all the presentations that we give, because it's a great infographic that sort of shows you, the top line goes to your ability to function, where your ability aligns with the care setting, then going down the cost, and then finally what public benefits are available. And so the idea is, if we have, more limited function, right, We have there an even more limited function assisted living facility. And so what I wanted to point out there is that in Pennsylvania, we have assisted living, but what we have more of are personal care homes. And so a lot of times clients will come in and say, my mom's in assisted living, right? And we want to know which facility. More often than not, it's actually a personal care home. Why does that matter? Because under the regulations that govern personal care homes, as compared with assisted living facilities, different set of regulations, when you need help with two or more activities of daily living in your nursing facility clinically eligible, that personal care home under its regulations is supposed to discharge the resident to a nursing home. Now, we know that that doesn't always happen. Usually what the personal care homes do is increase the person's, we'll call it rating, right? That they're in a higher tier of care and they ask the family to pay more. Sometimes what they'll say is if you want to keep your resident here, you need to pay additionally out of pocket for a home care aide to come in, right? And the reason I'm bringing this up is we have clients who come to us from time to time. Mom or dad is in the personal care home. They want to stay and they're paying, sometimes $25,000, $30,000 a month. That's bananas, right? When there's not an alignment between the care setting and the needs, we see these kinds of inflated costs. If somebody's in true assisted living, and again, there's not that many standalone ones in Pennsylvania, and you can look them up on the Department of Aging's website. The difference there is once somebody progresses along the continuum, a true assisted living is designed to keep the resident. They don't have to discharge them. They're not going to wildly increase the costs. But the difference is in order to get into a true assisted living, because that's the financial structure, you need to have a lot of money generally to get in, right? And I say generally because, sometimes clients manage to get in and we're like, wow, that's pretty surprising. But you want to sort of understand how the interplay of these things work to make sure you understand that if somebody's in a personal care home and the community is saying, yes, we can no longer accommodate your mom's needs, that's actually can be legal, right? That they are asking for a discharge to a skilled nursing facility. And so you sort of want to be forewarned about that. One of our big jobs as a life care planning firm is to help clients navigate this continuum and to make sure that there's an alignment between all four levels that you see on this chart. So as a life care planning firm, we have two elder care coordinators on our staff, both of whom are highly credentialed and frankly wonderful. And they are an invaluable resource to helping my clients navigate this. And then working together, we figure out the best way to arrange the finances to support the care that is needed. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're about, is that making sure that the older adult gets the care that they need in the least restrictive setting possible, right? Now, you notice I didn't say where the older adult will be happiest, right? Because we know that almost nobody is happy going into a skilled nursing facility. But when the needs are great, that is really the best place for the most part. If we have a good facility, right? And again, we need advocacy at all points along the way, but that can be the place where the older adult really does need to be. So I've been talking sort of generally here about sort of the continuum and the costs going up as we go along. So let's kind of look at some real numbers. So in terms of home care, and if you've ever, tried to engage with a home care agency, you'll hear that the costs are somewhere between $30 to $35 an hour, right? And then a lot of them have, 3-hour minimums, 4-hour minimums a day, certain number of days a week. So it can get really, really expensive. So I would say, this is a pretty general or, care plan, right? Where the family, these numbers that we have here, 6,300 to 6,500, that is definitely not 24/7. And it really requires the family to still provide a lot of support to get to that, which is still a pretty high number, amount of financial cost. Now, most home care is paid for out of pocket. It's private pay dollars, right? There are some options if you are entitled to the veterans benefit for aid and attendance. They give you a small allowance, provided your income and assets are pretty low, to pay towards home care. And then Medicaid also has a home care benefit under the CHC waiver program, also referred to as the home and community-based services benefit. It can be really challenging to access. There are very strict asset limitations and income limitations. So if your income is over $2,900 a month, then you're not eligible, and that's your gross income. But I always like to point out that there is the opportunity to explore that if, Medicaid in the home setting. It might not be appropriate for everyone. Some people's care needs are too great at home, and HCBS is generally not 24/7. It's very difficult. Really, I've only seen 2 clients in almost 9 years of really being involved in this, getting people qualified for that, get 24/7, and they were quite ill. So again, if you're thinking about a home care, we don't want you to have sticker shock. It is mainly out of pocket unless those 2 public benefit programs apply. And then also the VA, even if your loved one is in the VA health system, there is a VA extended care benefit if somebody, say, is service connected. And then we always say, reach out to the local VA and get more information on that. Adult day health services, I think these are really underutilized because they're not prevalent depending on your geography, but they can be a really nice bridge to give the caregiver that respite that is so sorely needed if you do decide to keep somebody at home. We've already talked about assisted living, but again, look at the cost, and I think that's again on the modest side for both assisted living and memory care. The nursing home, we've given you the semi-private rate there. The private pay rate can be, $15,000, $16,000 a month. That's a lot of money, and that's one of the things that usually drives people to pick up the phone as they get that first bill, and they think, "Oh God, oh goodness, we weren't aware that that's what it was going to look like." We have in there semi-private because that's what Medicaid will pay for. But again, until you get eligible for Medicaid, you're looking at private pay dollars for that. So just wanted to give you a little bit of context in terms of what are these numbers. So who's paying for all of this? So as I mentioned, home health care, it's really for Medicare, and I think this is the big sort of disappointment for people. When you come out of the hospital or even a rehab facility, the amount of home care you get is pretty limited and it ends, right? So it's not going to give you that non-medical home care that you might need. It's going to give you maybe PT, OT, nursing services, but it's really of a finite duration. Long-term care insurance can be a great way to keep people at home. But again, there are coverage limitations. So you always want to check your policy, talk to the carrier to see what is going to be possible well ahead of when you actually need the care. But it can be a really nice way to meet that first bullet point, right? Of how many people want to stay at home as long as possible, right? Long-term care insurance, if you get it at the right time, can be helpful. I want to skip down to hospice care. I think folks, there's a lot of misunderstanding there. If the providers are starting to talk to you about hospice, it's because they think that your loved one might have 6 months or less to live. That's how you get certified for hospice. But here's the thing. It gets you basically additional free services, additional free durable medical equipment. It does not mean that the person is going to pass away in 6 months. It just means that a medical provider, a doctor thinks that it's a likelihood. But I have clients who decline the benefit before they talk to us because they think, oh, we don't want to we don't want to hear about hospice. That sounds too fatalistic. Here's the thing, you can graduate from hospice. I had a client, she graduated 6 times. She was unbelievable. I believe my grandmother graduated twice, right? So there's, the sort of stigma around the word, I think gets in the way sometimes of people accessing that benefit. And so I always sort of put a plug in for that, to just really understand that it can be an important benefit, and it doesn't mean that you're giving up on the person, but there can be important interplays, right, in terms of treatments and things that might need to stop. But it's always worth a further conversation with your provider, not just sort of putting up your hands the second you hear the H word and saying no, right? So just, you always want to explore that a little bit deeper before saying no. I want to kind of pivot into, I think, one of the biggest areas of confusion, which is the difference between Medicare and Medicaid. The names are very similar at the federal level, right? In the states, each state, because Medicaid is a federal and state run program, each state gets to give it their own name, right? So in Pennsylvania, it's called medical assistance, right? And it's offered, there's lots of different types of medical assistance. There's medical assistance for people who are just have very low income and low assets. There's medical assistance that goes along with SSI if you're disabled. Medicaid I'm going to talk about is what we call the Medicaid long-term care benefit. And so that's the one I'm going to focus on. There's waivers, there's all kinds of things. And I think when people hear Medicaid, it's sort of, they don't necessarily understand that it is a massive program that serves a lot of different populations. But one of the deficiencies in the original Medicare Act from 1965 is that it didn't cover long-term custodial care of older adults, right? And so where that got picked up is in the Medicaid program, which was designed for impoverished people. So as a result of Medicare failing to include, in what is in my view, this very critical benefit to support older adults, older Americans as we move through our life cycles, elder care planners are operating in a poverty program system, which means we've got to do a lot of different things and strategies and techniques that are all lawful, because this gap in Medicare and the poverty program, Medicaid, not only picking up this gap and covering custodial long-term care, but covering the majority of it nationwide. Last I checked, the statistic is that 2/3 of people in nursing homes are covered by the Medicaid program. And then part of that is because people have done planning. A lot of it is because people are spending all of their money at the nursing home. I gave you that figure a little bit ago, $15,000 a month. If you think about it, that's a pretty good burn rate, right? So people are kind of going through their assets and becoming impoverished and qualifying for Medicaid just because they have the sort of misfortune to end up in a nursing home due to whatever illness they have. But again, we say, this is the myth that most people believe that Medicare is going to pick up the bill for the custodial care, right? For when the nursing home says, the rehabilitation stay, that sort of up to 100 days of rehabilitation stay following 3 days in a hospital, that sometimes comes as a surprise to people when they get a cut notice, right? The average of that 100 days is, 26 is something, a statistic I picked up last week at a conference. So that's another sort of myth that people think, well, I'll get 100 days in the rehab facility to potentially get better and go home. But no, I mean, that's a myth. They're going to evaluate you and decide whether or not they believe that you have a need for skilled nursing care to maintain your level of functioning. And I want to put in a little note here. If somebody says, oh, we're cutting your Medicare time at the rehab facility because you have plateaued, right? Then I want to recommend that you go over to the Center for Medicare Advocacy and look for their JIMO, JIMMO toolkit. JIMO versus Sebelius is a case that they litigated. to make it clear and to provide guidance. And this was now, I guess, 11 years ago, that the standard is not whether the person has plateaued, right? It's whether they need skilled care to maintain a level of functioning, right? So they have a great resource there. Again, we're happy to help, you guide you with that as well. But I think people are still hearing, even all these years after Jimmo, that, that your loved one has plateaued, so they're cut. That is not the law, and you can appeal. There's, the phone number that you can call, and you can appeal, a denial if your Medicare is cut short sooner than you think it should be. I kind of got into this before, what about long-term care insurance? It's expensive, right? And you can't necessarily qualify for it if you already have, an illness. But I always say, if you're on the younger side of old, like me, I'm in my 50s, that it's worth a conversation with an insurance broker to see if it could be right for you. But it might not, maybe, depending on your situation, you might be able to self-insure and think about moving into a continuing care community, which is where you give, typically, but not always, depending on the type of contract, a big lump sum to get into a community. And the idea is that they're going to care for you for the rest of your days, as long as you agree not to give up the assets that you've declared to them. So that's kind of really like a nutshell. I could do a whole thing and have on CCRCs, but there are different ways to look at how to plan for getting older. Long-term care insurance is one, looking at CCRCs is another, but there's no one-size-fits-all solution. And I can't stress that enough. The number of folks that call and, think that there's maybe some secret, that I know, follow me, come over here. No, there really isn't. Every family situation is different. Family dynamics are different. The assets are different. We've got to we look at everybody as an individual, and what's right for you is what we would design. And it might not be what's right for your neighbor, what the lady at church said she did, or things like this. So you really want to make sure that you're meeting with professionals, right? Chat GPT. Hey, I use it too. I used it, I had some random question about my multivitamin, right? Well, I love ChatGPT. You can use it, but it's not the greatest place to get personalized advice for you, even if your prompt has a lot of personal information. Again, it gives you a lot of information, so you feel like you got an answer, but it also won't tell you what it doesn't know. The generative AI, as it's called, is designed to please, right? It's designed to give you an answer. It will never say, I don't know. It will never say, that sounds really complicated. Maybe you should talk to somebody about that. Maybe they'll give you a little bit of that. But in this area, you really want to make sure that you understand all the options that are available to you, right? And talk to people who have education and experience and guiding people through this. So, again, somebody who has a lot of experience with long-term care insurance, meeting with your financial advisor. A lot of the work that I do, we want to bring in the financial advisor, the accountant, and really surround our clients so that the client gets the benefit of how we all fit together to support you as you move along, that aging continuum. Kind of covered this, but again, the idea here is families sort of, again, I think underestimate how expensive it is. That's why we do that, that chart of showing you how expensive it is. Understanding when public benefits will kick in and why they kick in. And I don't even want to say kick in, right? Because sometimes clients say, well, Medicaid will kick in then. Well, Medicaid doesn't kick in. Medicaid is something you have to qualify for and apply for. When you're applying for Medicaid in a long-term, and you want it in a long-term care facility, kind of something that people sometimes don't realize is that your loved one must be a resident of a long-term care facility before you can apply, because Medicaid, it has two main elements to it. You need to be medically needy and financially needy. Now, if you're getting it in the community, You don't obviously need to be in a long-term care facility, but you still need to be medically needy, that an assessor is going to come out from the county to determine whether you have a level of care that meets Medicaid's requirements. So, sometimes people just think, oh, it'll just kick in, like somehow somebody will know. Like, no, you have to show the Medicaid office to the penny, and I do mean to the penny, that you meet their asset requirements. And generally speaking, it's no more than $2,400. And no, that is not a misstatement. 2,400. That's all you can have in countable resources. So that includes basically, your cash, your investments, your if you're again a single person, your retirement accounts, everything that you have. It excludes your house, one car, funeral and burial plots, an irrevocable burial reserve, the tangible personal property in your house. But otherwise, everything else is counted. There are other rules that relate to spouses. I'll say here that one of the best rules we have in Pennsylvania is that the community spouse's retirement account of whatever flavor that is completely excluded, right? But I would say I could do a whole and I have done a whole hour just on qualifying for Medicaid. So I'm giving you again just a little sliver here. But the idea is if you have an idea that, yeah, we're going to want to qualify mom or dad for Medicaid in a skilled nursing facility, the best approach is to do that with the guidance of an elder care attorney. There are so many traps for the unwary in this. And I say that not because like, oh, by the way, I'm an elder care attorney, come see me. I say that because it really is heartbreaking to see families doing, making moves, liquidating accounts, moving assets around, taking people's names off of things, printing powers of attorney off the internet. They think they've done all the right things, only to find out when they meet with an elder care attorney that they've done more harm than good because they didn't know, right? You were just trying to do the best you could. But there are, like I said, so many hidden traps in this stuff that, if you're thinking about planning, the best way to do that kind of planning is with a professional who does it all the time. So, because these are real dollars, right? I showed you that slide. This is real money that's at stake. And every month that you do it wrong or perhaps create a penalty period, right, where you have to pay out of pocket, we'll call it $15,000 a month. That's a lot of money. So this is not the time for you to Google, get your law degree from Google, right? Many clients do. They come to me with all the things they've Googled. And no disrespect, I understand people are scared. They want answers. You can get into Google now in the stroke of a key. And you might have to wait a week or so or 2 weeks to get to see a lawyer, but that wait is worth it. It can really cost your family a lot of money. So this is kind of what I call the typical carousel of doom. Because what I've experienced in my career is a lot of times it isn't as linear as all of this, that somebody will have a health event at home, we'll say a fall, it's pretty common. Maybe the family has been trying to keep mom or dad home because they heard about those scary nursing homes and the cost. So they keep somebody home longer than is safe. So there's a health event that lands the older adult in the hospital. They're then discharged to a rehabilitation facility. The family's like, we don't want to stay at the rehab facility as a custodial care patient now that the Medicare has run out, right? Whether or not they can safely return home, they put the older adult home and then they end up back at the top of the chart. Health event, hospital, rehab, repeat, repeat, repeat. At some point, hopefully before the second or third time when the older adult is, again, getting worse and worse each time, we have a real discussion about, is it safe? Is it safe for that older adult to return home? Not do they want to, right? Which to me is important to ascertain what the older adult wants, but that can't be the end of the story, particularly if our older adult has dementia that presents with severe executive functioning limitations, meaning they really can't make good choices about what's in their best interest anymore. So it's incumbent on the family to decide, Yes, we can maybe bring her home, think about qualifying for Medicaid. I heard there's a lawyer who can help with that. Or maybe we can all chip in and do home care. Or no, we can't safely return them home. So let's figure out where on the continuum of care someone needs to be. For me, I would love it if people would proceed in a linear path and not sort of do that carousel of doom where they're circling back to home, hospital, rehab, home, health event, hospital, rehab. I see it all the time. And by the time the second or third time comes, everybody's stressed out, overwhelmed. The time to have that discussion of can someone safely return home is really well in advance of that first health event, right? That you're developing a plan of what would happen if, what would happen when, so that when and if the bad thing happens, you're ready to go. You understand how you're going to pay for it, and you have your estate planning documents in a row. And we're going to get to that in a second. Kind of walked you through this a little bit. Again, most families wait until the bad thing happens. No judgment. I get it. It's scary. There's lots of decisions to be made. Maybe the older adult isn't on board, is fighting hard about any kind of change, right? Because they're not able to understand the severity of their condition. Again, that's where getting professional support can help. Even bringing in maybe a geriatric care manager as another resource that can help families who are maybe stuck. They say, yeah, we know we want to make a change for mom, but we can't get her to listen, can't get her to agree. Bringing in a third party, a new voice, right? Because a lot of times it's not the message, it's the messenger. So a geriatric care manager can be a great resource for the family to work directly with mom or dad. Because sometimes, but not always, they can really be that voice of reason that can help get a much needed change going. And then for our point of view, when people wait, right, and maybe spend a lot of money and do things, or maybe, well, the nursing home said I should do this, and go through all the money, we might have fewer options. And sort of the tip I want to leave you with there. So there's two on this slide. One, think about using a geriatric care manager to help sort of unstick, or the services of a life care planning firm to unstick an older adult who might be digging in when it's working at cross purposes with their safety and welfare, and not taking legal advice from the business office of the nursing home. I stress this because it is just so sad to me when clients come and they've spent lots of money, over $100,000, because the nice person in the business office said, just write us a check every month. And then when you run out of money, we'll help you apply for Medicaid, right? Lots of planning opportunities have gone out the window. And the families are usually pretty bummed to hear that there were things that they could have done, right? And you might be saying, well, because this is popular information, what about the 5-year look back? Doesn't that mean there's nothing I can do because I didn't have 5 years? And the answer to that is that there's always something that we can do, right? Even within the 5 years, right? So, but I can't unspend the money. So if the money is already gone, it can be a challenging situation. So not that the business offices are bad people, but what their job is to get the facility paid, right? They're not necessarily looking out for your loved one's financial well-being, nor should they, right? They have their incentives, and as nice as they are, they're not there to give you legal advice. They're there to get their parent company paid for that stay. So, always the second there's an admission, that is the time to get legal advice about how do we pay for this. So just pivoting, the last few minutes that we're going to talk about, I think, estate planning, how does that fit into all of this? Well, estate planning, again, even, the word estate, it doesn't mean that you have to have millions of dollars. If you have stuff, you have an estate. And if you have an estate, you should plan with it, right? So at a minimum, everybody should have a will, but understand that a will only speaks at death, right? So its use as a lifetime document is there isn't any, right? It does not become effective until you pass away. So what do you need? Well, you need a power of attorney. That's who you're going to name as the person who's going to be able to make financial decisions for you. You don't have to be incapacitated for that document to be effective. Sometimes you just need a little help, or you want your kids there on standby to be able to help you. But a financial power of attorney is going to be the really critical document that we need our clients to have when doing any kind of long-term care planning. And not all powers of attorney are created the same, right? So I just had this discussion yesterday with somebody who printed out a form from the internet, had their parents sign it. It was signed correctly in that it met the requirements of Pennsylvania, that it was signed before two witnesses and a notary, but it didn't actually authorize the agent to engage in any authority at all, right? And even if it had done that, the things that were listed in the document were missing key provisions that would have allowed the agent to do Medicaid planning. So what is in your power of attorney? The quality of that power of attorney actually matters. I haven't seen a lot of good ones from the internet, I'm going to be honest. And it's always, tough on me because I got to tell some family member that thought they did the right thing and paid, I don't know what you pay for those things, $29.99. That, oh, we paid $30. Like, what do you mean it's no good? You get what you pay for, right? And you don't know what you don't know. So again, before doing any kind of estate planning and getting documents, even though you can do it online, and I know I've seen all the ads on TV too, LegalZoom, Trust and Will, you might think, well, why do estate planning attorneys not object to that? And the reason is because they give us more work than we ever could have hoped for. The garbage that people print out and sign has made probably a lot of estate planning attorneys have very profitable practices in having to fix all the mistakes and problems that are caused by online documents. And so, when you think about the cost, it's far less expensive to do it right in the first instance than to end up in litigation over documents that were not properly prepared, taking into account the individual's financial situation. But at the end of the day, in Pennsylvania, you don't need trust. You don't need a revocable living trust to avoid probate. And I know, again, that's something people see on TV a lot. Susie Orman gets on there pushing her living trust kit. She lives in Florida. And in Florida, you probably do need a living trust to avoid probate because probate is a nightmare. Pennsylvania probate takes, and I'm not exaggerating, less than 10 minutes. It takes you longer to find a parking spot at the Register of Wills for your probate appointment than it does to do the probate appointment. So, parking, if you ever try to park at the Delaware County Courthouse, you know what I mean? It literally takes less than 10 minutes, sometimes less than 5 minutes if we've really got everything dialed in. So this is not something to turn yourself in knots and to produce documents that don't align with your situation to avoid probate. If you're a Pennsylvanian, it's not necessary, generally speaking, right? All of the things I'm telling you in today's session, general advice. None of this is designed to speak to you directly, but hopefully the idea is this gets some wheels turning, right? And you think, well, I'd like to find out more if a trust, whether it's a revocable trust or an irrevocable trust, applies to my situation. That is a great conversation to have with an elder care attorney, in particular, an estate planning attorney as well. But the idea is that all of this stuff is contextual. It should not be cookie cutter. It really does directly relate to what assets you have, how they are titled, what your family dynamic situation is. If you meet with a lawyer and they say, oh, just give me your names and I'll fill in the blanks and press the button, run away, right? Because you're going to end up with documents that don't do what you need them to do. And generally, when you find out that your documents are faulty, are when you're in a crisis situation. And the real danger there is that the older adult, who is the person who has to make the documents, you can't make a power of attorney for them. You can't make a will for them. They have to be able to do it, and they need to have the mental capacity to be able to do it under the law, right? So these are things that we don't want to wait, right? We want to get as soon as we hear of a diagnosis. If mom or dad has put out their planning, now is the time to get the ducks in a row, get the planning done. Because again, we see it all the time. You don't want to find out when mom or dad is incapacitated that that $30 POA you got is no good. So I already covered this. And so again, why I probably hit all this as well. We want to give clients meaningful choice about where their loved one can go on the continuum of care, right? So many people think like, oh, it's just going to be the nursing home or nothing, right? That's a bit of a fatalistic attitude. With some planning, there might be other opportunities that are better suited than the less restrictive alternative and most restrictive alternative, waiting till crisis, ending up in that most restrictive setting of the nursing home, right? We can try to find solutions and funding and things that might make sense. Again, depends, every family's different. In other settings, home care, day health, the life program, things like this. So there's lots of other options that could be available to provide for the care. And once we get the care right, everything else makes sense. Then we do the asset planning to support the level of care. We're not just going to take assets away from an older adult because we're worried about the nursing home getting it. We're going to rearrange assets to support the level of care in a way that makes everybody feel good about the work that we've done. And when we plan, we naturally reduce stress and hopefully we preserve independence and dignity of our older adult to the greatest extent possible. So again, it's never too late to plan. So if someone said to you, well, you don't have 5 years, forget it, you're hosed. I can't stress enough that is not true, right? It's never too late to plan. Now, if the earlier you do it, sure, you're probably gonna have better options, but it's never too late to plan. And before you do something drastic, like listen to the neighbor who said, oh, put your kid on your house or transfer your house to your kid, get professional advice. I can't stress that enough. It is just so heartbreaking to see families who think they've done the right thing. Again, no judgment, right? They're trying to do the right thing. Some other family member, friend, coworker is, giving them half-baked advice on what they did without getting one of those pesky lawyers involved. And then when I review it, it's like you've created a huge problem, and particularly with adult children. So the thing to know there is that Pennsylvania does have a filial responsibility statute on the books. And what that means is that a child can be held liable for the health care of an indigent parent. So how that plays out is the family kind of figures that they'll wing it and move assets away from the older adult and then spend them. And the time comes to apply for Medicaid and there's a denial, right? Because of the gifts that were made. The gifts can't be cured because the family has spent the money. The nursing home could come after you as the children for that money, right? So there's real consequences to this, right? So you really do want to proceed with caution and get professional advice. Again, we talked about this. 5 common mistakes. I think I've gone through all of these ahead of time, and just really number 4, can't stress enough, not having a financial power of attorney. And I would amplify this just a little bit and say not having a good power of attorney, right? They're not all created equal. The ones that are going to be prepared by a lawyer with you and your circumstances in mind are going to really be what fits the bill. Again, don't want to give assets away without understanding the look back, penalty periods, and exceptions that might apply, right? So there's certain exceptions like the ability to transfer a home to a caregiver child who lived in the house with you for at least 2 years and provided care that kept you out of the nursing home, and you can get a doctor's note to say that, right? So that's just one exception, but there's lots, and you don't know what applies to you until you really get the good professional guidance. And of course, waiting until all the money is gone is really a big mistake. So I think I've gone through all of this as well. So I'm going to just sort of get to the end here and just again saying that there's lots of Medicaid myths out there. And so part of our job, why do we do these webinars, is if we can educate even a small group of people who can then maybe tell more people about the realities of things. So if you hear somebody say, oh, my husband's in a nursing home, but I took his name off all of our bank accounts, so that should sort it. I want you to say, well, maybe you should talk to an attorney. I heard that's not going to work. Or, oh, we gave our house away to the kids. That should cover it. Not necessarily, right? You could create a lot of problems. You can create income tax problems, right? So the idea is that hopefully we arm you with enough information, one webinar at a time, to at least know a little bit more than you did when we first started at the top of the hour, to help you at least make some better decisions and maybe help some other folks along the way who might be making a misstep. Allie, I don't know if we've gotten any questions, but we can take those now.
No questions.
All right, then. Wonderful. Well, hopefully that means I was crystal clear.
But we actually just got one in, Chari.
Oh, okay, great.
Can you define community property states in relation to setting up beneficiaries?
Sure. Well, Pennsylvania, I would say that is a great question for a practitioner that works in a community property state. I am a Pennsylvania practitioner, and so we're a separate property state. So if you have that issue, you should talk to, I don't know what state you were in, but that's not something I'm qualified to answer.
Next question. Can you just talk a little bit about long-term care insurance?
Sure. So, again, I kind of covered this already, but the idea is if you think that, you're on the younger side, you're healthy, so you would pass the medical underwriting, it's something to explore with a financial professional. It is very expensive, right? But there are different products out there. I am not licensed to sell products, but there are some options, and the place to go for that really is with a licensed insurance professional who has a lot of experience, and it really can come in handy. So, long-term care insurance can be a critical piece of the puzzle in keeping people at home, right? Because it's going to give you additional dollars to pay for that home care. We saw it could be as much as, when I wanted a quote for home care for my mom, they said $25,000. And we had long-term care insurance, but that was not going to even come close to what the home care agency wanted, right? So, but we did end up using the long-term care insurance, and my clients do this as well for memory care, right? So we were able to have mom transition to memory care. The long-term care insurance covered it, right? And we didn't have a huge out-of-pocket outlay. And that's really, I like to say it's really is kind of a gift to your kids, right? That you're making an investment in protecting their future inheritance. And it's also really, that's sort of a jokey sort of comment, but it's not without a kernel of truth. But really it's for you, that having ways to pay for healthcare preserves choice. And at the end of the day, we are all about self-determination and choice for our clients, right? Ultimately, you want to be the one that makes the decision. Most people, if I could do a show of hands, wouldn't want to be a burden on their families. So long-term care insurance can be an important piece of the puzzle.
Let's see, the next one. You use the term personal care. How does that compare and contrast to long-term care?
So, right, so the long-term care system, and I can kind of go back to the slide on that. Okay. So this is the whole long-term care system, right? So the assisted living facility, and in this, I would say this infographic, this would be personal care. There's very few true assisted livings, as I said, outside of a continuing care retirement community, but they're all of the long-term care refers to all of it, right? So it could be care in the home. It could be, for an older adult that needs it for custodial care, non-medical home care, moving into personal care, memory care, nursing care. It's all part of the long-term care continuum of care. And again, as we've talked about, how you pay for it, how you get from one spot to the other, really individualistic. And I have clients that this isn't, doesn't go in one direction. I've Doesn't happen all the time, but I have had clients sort of get out of the nursing home because they ended up doing better. But it relates to everything on the continuum of care.
Can you please repeat what you said about needing to be in a long-term care facility to apply for Medicaid? It seems you said there is an exception to that.
So if we're thinking about asking for the Medicaid grant to pay for our nursing home stay, so long-term care relates to the entire continuum. In particular, and again, if you look at the infographic, the nursing home aligns with the Medicaid on the far right-hand side. If we're thinking about going into a nursing home, we've actually got to check in, right, before we can make application to Medicaid to ask them to pay for the stay. It can't be, and it can't be like, oh, well, my mom's going to go in a couple of months. Like, can I get Medicaid now ahead of time? Like, no, you actually have to cross the threshold of the nursing home to qualify for the Medicaid long-term care benefit. And then even once you're in there, there's certain documentation that needs to be filled out to certify that the older adult is truly nursing facility clinically eligible in a doctor's opinion and the county assessor's opinion. So that is the rule.
Okay, and we'll just do one more. Do you have any suggestions specific to individuals with lifelong disabilities or disabilities acquired in one's early years?
Say the question again.
Do you have any suggestions specific to individuals with lifelong disabilities or disabilities acquired in one's early years?
Oh wow, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a great question. I think that can be a really nice situation to bring in a care manager earlier to help you develop a care plan. You can also work with an elder care attorney, and we do that too, to help you come up with a plan. And and the plan would be specific to you. I mean, for that, I think the goals would be, really figuring out, well, what type of disability do you have? Where would you be suitable? It's kind of hard to sort of answer that, you know, question sort of generically. I don't think there's a big difference in terms of how we approach the situation, right? We're looking at people holistically, so whether they are recently diagnosed or whether it's a lifelong thing, we're trying to figure out what makes sense for your particular situation. Do you have, the assets to pay for what it is that you want? If not, what other options are there? And do you have the estate planning, set up to take care of that? And, sometimes with someone with a lifelong disability, the other kind of thing that creeps in is, does your family have the right type of planning? So the idea would be, have they set up in their planning, say, supplemental needs trust for you, so that if you're likely to end up on public benefits when you get your inheritance, you're not getting it sort of outright where it could interfere with public benefits. So there's a lot to unpack with that. So I would say it's always worth the conversation, at least a consultation with a lawyer to go through what you have. I'm going to give you kind of a general game plan. And that's what we do here. When we meet with clients, we do a paid consultation, but it's a working appointment. So before the appointment, we ask you to fill out our questionnaire, provide financial information, so that even if we only meet with you for that hour, you're leaving with, recommendations and an action plan for, where you go from that meeting.
Okay, great. We're running out of time, so we have a couple more questions, but I actually have them documented so we can answer them after the webinar.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I'm sorry, guys. I have to run to, I have a client appointment. They shoehorned me in today. But I want to thank everybody. It looks like most people have stayed on. So thank you to the bitter end. So, thank you again. The thing I want to share most of all is that we're here to help at Anderson Elder Law. That really is part of our mission, is really taking care of our clients like they're our family. And, again, if we can be of assistance to you or, someone that after hearing this, please don't hesitate to reach out. We would be happy to talk with you.
Great. Thank you, Chari. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We also want to invite you to our next webinar on August 20th. So you just keep an eye out for that. We hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the afternoon. Thank you. Bye-bye.